How you doing? Hi. Hi. I'm talking about third-party data breaches. Don't worry, I'll try not to bore you so much. So, what's this talk about? Well, really, it's a little to do with big data. Yeah, I know. The problem with big data is it's pretty hard to define, but I think I've found a working definition that can work for us all. So, big data is anything that basically crashes Excel. It's mostly about third-party data breaches, about web services that you use that end up having their databases leaked online and all the problems. It's really an old story of website meets hacker, hacker meets database, everybody in the database meets the internet. It's been a massive problem for a little while. It's most certainly to do with user behavior, because, you know, everybody loves Dave. Your users are absolutely awesome, by the way. A show of hands, who has to look after corporate users and their email? You're going to fucking love this talk, right? And it's a lot to do with finding alternative solutions for traditional problems. So, if this guy is not a hacker, I don't know who is, right? It should have been called, for fuck's sake, Elasticsearch. But I'm not sure that that would have sold the talk so well, right? But, you know. And here we go. Here is the traditional about me moment. I've been a bit slack over that over the years, but I felt this time I would do something. So this is me and Mike Kemp meeting Henry Rollins. I'm the guy at the back. And I do believe that Ken is in here right over there. So everybody say hi, Ken. Hi! So how did this all happen? How did I get here talking to you about third-party data breaches? Well, what happened is I actually built a tool that I was doing for part of some research for a conference back in Germany. And it currently tracks 61 databases that had their customer details leaked on the internet. The tool is basically a search engine, but it's only concerned with third-party data breaches. And you can do like key value searches over 61 databases simultaneously. I know it sounds a bit like I'm reinventing the wheel, but if you can imagine that you would be doing this regularly with grep, you can start to see why you might want to index something like this. And I will talk about this throughout the talk. Corporations are exposed massively. It's not just about, you know, citizens having their data leaked as well. Businesses are being affected by third-party data breaches massively. You can also do conditional types of searches of this tool. So as you would expect for a search engine, and filtering and all of this stuff. So when I started, I really had this simple idea. There'd been a lot of high-profiled databases leaked online. Some of them I'm sure you'll remember, such as Ashley Madison and Adult Friend Finder. Woohoo! Thank you, Ashley. Wouldn't it have been really interesting, at the time I thought, wouldn't it be really interesting if we could cross-reference Adult Friend Finder with Ashley Madison? Just because I'm an asshole like that, right? But that would mean I would need to search them. And can a database really be a search engine? This is a trick question. The answer to this is always no. Databases can't be search engines because they're shit. So I had this idea. Why don't you index them and put them into a search engine? It sounds so simple, right? And what I discovered is it was a hell of a lot easier to say it than it was to actually do it. I ended up developing a modified ELK stack. Put your hands up if you know what the ELK stack is. Okay. The next slide's boring. This is the ELK stack. It's called ELK because Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. Elasticsearch is basically a search engine. Kibana is basically a front end, and Logstash is basically a tool to pipe logs into it. And it's also only really good for a poor man's seam when it boils down to it, right? But it's cool. But in the end, what it gave me was a REST API that I can send complex queries to about data breaches in general. It kind of speaks JSON. So we put JSON in, and we get JSON out. And this is me meeting Jason, which is a bit awkward. But all jokes aside, don't underestimate the value of having a well-defined standard returned back to you, especially when it comes to third-party data breaches. Because what you have to imagine is, if you're doing this with grep or something like this, you'd be having to deal with CSV, TSV, Postgres, MySQL, and every other fucked up file format that was there. Interesting sidebar on this. When you do this work, what you get to see is databases being enumerated. So if you go through like dumps, you'll sometimes see in the username field, usernames being registered that are /.//etc/passwords, and then you'll see like, bin bash, all of this sort of stuff going on. And then you'll get to the end of it and it will send end of file, and you realize that the SQL worked. You'll see this in a lot of data dumps where they're being enumerated. But this is a real big, hard problem because log data is pretty standard, right? We know what syslog is going to throw back. It's really easy for us to build schemas and stuff like this to understand. But the problem with data dumps is when the hackers exfil the data from their compromise, it's like they don't even think about me, right? It's not like they sit there and say, oh shit, Finux would probably like this in a CSV format, so if we can exfil the data in a CSV, he'll fucking love us. No, they don't do this. So you have to deal with all of these complex file formats. And CSV and TSV is a lot of fun. MySQL is okay. Postgres is a bit of a nightmare. Weblogs, fuck weblogs. So on and so forth. So when you build data sets for indexing, so what we do is we convert all the data that we find, like a CSV, we convert it into JSON. And that's how we can do the key value pair searches. And it's quite tricky to do it. So there's really a simple methodology that what you do is you end up analyzing the data, normalizing it and converting it, inserting it into Elasticsearch, realizing that you're a fucking idiot and repeating the whole thing again and again and again and again and again and again. And eventually what you will find is you will have a search engine that you can find shit. And it was a lot of fun at the beginning. It was a lot of these building blocks put together. But what was really needed, we started off with Ashley Madison, Adult Friend Finder, and if anyone can remember, the pawns list from LulzSec. So when we first did it, it was a lot of fun because, lol, you're in this, and this, okay. Later on, we added more dumps, and that changed a lot of things. So firstly, this is the constant battle that I have inside of my head whenever I see a new data set or a dump, because it looks really interesting. And then you say, hey, why don't you index it? And if you're lucky, that might be a 3-hour job. And if you're unlucky, it might be a 2.5-year job. There are still data sets that I'm working with to try and massage them way into JSON. And as I said earlier on, one of the first issues that you get with doing this sort of stuff is you inherit the complexity of the database that you're taking, which is a really wordy way of saying if the DBA is shit, you're going to clean that mess up before you get it into JSON. But any database that's malformed or any of this problem will cause you issues when you're trying to index it. Also, when you decouple, so databases have this relational data model, right? They link bits of data, and it's, it makes sense. But you have to decouple this when you want to make it into JSON. So something like Ashley Madison was actually split over 5 different databases, which before you even start, converting them all into JSON is pretty difficult. And give you a fun fact, when you convert the whole of Ashley Madison into JSON, it is 191 million documents. And a document is a collection of personal identifiable information. So that's not 191 million pieces of information. That's probably closer to 900 million pieces of information just from Ashley Madison. It's also 110 gig on disk when it's converted to JSON too, but that's a completely different story. And you have to be careful of this, because if you want to have this search experience, this showdown-like experience over data dumps, you really have to work at this, really have to be able to fix these problems. Any problem that you get as a web developer, you also get when you try to index data. So when you look at dating profiles, are a great example. People tend to put little smileys and shit in their dating, because, you know, I'm not going to date this guy. Oh, I'm going to date this guy because he's got a smiley. I don't know why we do it, but this is what happens. The problem is that's a malformed key value pair. So you have to basically input sanitize everything before you even start. And that can be massively tricky. The second issue that we have is that everybody stores the data differently. Like, geez, Finux, next you're going to tell us that water is wet and fire is hot. But I joke aside, databases tend to be a reflection of the person that set up the database. So one man's handle is another man's nickname, is another man's username. But you all want to search this in a unified manner. So you don't want to say search, handle, nick, email, blah, 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 blah. So you have to work this stuff out. There's a whole lot of internal stuff that you need to work out what's going on. But as an end user, what you want to do is you want to have these uniform search experience, right? You want to be able to search these data. And it's a lesson that I learned the hard way. And I think 3 questions that you should really look when you're trying to like index big data, and certainly in security terms, is that normalization is probably key when you're taking data from lots of different places. Getting the password plane and email and password hash and all of this, so that's standard across the whole entire data set. You need to ask yourself about, if I'm going to be doing searches, are we going to be using wildcard searches? Because wildcard searches tend to be incredibly expensive on search engines. So, of course, when you want to take like Ashley Madison and Adult Friend Finder and MySpace and LinkedIn and search them all simultaneously, you're really wanting to search the email address, right? So you do star@mycorporation.com. And then what happens is the server says, fuck off and leave me alone, and dies. And this happens quite a lot. In the end, what you really need to do is start asking yourself the type of searches that you're likely to do and how you can make those easier. And we achieved that by a really simple fix. We went over the new data sets and said, hey, everything with an ampersand, an @ sign, just split and make a new key value pair that says domain. And what happens then is, instead of having this really expensive wildcard search, you have a very simple match all text search that's really, really quickly. An example of this is when we first started with half the data that we've got now. When we did wildcard searches, they could take anything up to 3 to 6 minutes to come through. Once we fixed the wildcard problem by not having the wildcards, we were getting results back in 11 seconds, 12 seconds, these sort of time frames. So the importance to understand, like, if you want to have a lot of data and search for it from a security standpoint, is try and understand what's the likely thing you're going to be looking for first. And that effort that you put in at the beginning will come back and pay you tenfold in the future. I can guarantee you. I mean, I learned all these lessons in blood so that you didn't have to, right? Do you know what I mean? But seriously, have a think about how, if you want to search large data sets, how you want to access it, or how you're likely to do it. I added mate1. Raise your hand if you know what mate1 is. You know what? You're a bunch of lying bastards, because I've got statistics that says very different. No one put their hand up, and I'm going to show you later on why I don't believe you, right? So it gave me millions of plain text passwords, which is cool. Then I added LinkedIn. That also changed a few things. Who remembers the LinkedIn data breach? Raise your hands. Don't be shy. What was the big problem with the LinkedIn data breach? Unsalted hashes. Thank you, LinkedIn. The unsalted hashes led to quite an interesting twist later on. I will kind of discuss that in a little bit. But what was important really, from a mindset point of view, from where we were doing our research, was adding LinkedIn. Beforehand, what we had was a search engine that looked at datas, you know, like dating websites, Ashley Madison, Adult Friend Finder, Mate One, and cool, you weren't guaranteed to find anybody in it, right? But when you add LinkedIn, what happened was you stopped being able to find people hooking up for affairs or people trying to date. And what you were able to do is all of a sudden ask which LinkedIn users also had Ashley Madison or Adult Friend Finder. It changed the nature of the questions that you were able to ask, which was a huge, and to steal a word from Jason, a paradigm shift about how we saw the processing of data. Because once you did this, we started to realize that you enrich every single dump by adding more dumps to it. There is a huge amount of cases when we started of people being in LinkedIn and Ashley Madison and Adult Friend Finder and the PornSec LOL list and Mate One. Like, oh shit. You'd be surprised. It's huge, right? As I said earlier on, it also made me very interested in passwords, especially as a kind of, at this point, when I added MySpace and LinkedIn and Zeus and all of these other reasonably high-profile dumps, we were left with probably about 1 billion unsalted hashes. And trust me, you know, we talk about 0 days and so on and so forth, but most of your people's passwords are being stored unsalted on someone's server somewhere, right? We've still got bigger problems. So what I did is I ended up building an independent index that was based of just SHA-1s and MD5s and their plain text passwords. It now has 1.3 billion different plain text passwords with their relevant SHA-1s and MD5s. If you remember rainbow tables, this is exactly really what it is. It is a elastic table, as we like to say, right? But you can send a SHA-1 or an MD5 over a curl request, and it will come back to you in a couple of seconds and tell you what the password is. The index was created from pretty much every word list I could find, and every single plain text password that we discovered inside the search engine. So it continually is being updated with new passwords. So even if your password wasn't in a word list, if some other user happened to have your password and put it somewhere else unsafe, boom, that SHA-1 is suddenly searchable, right? It's nasty. As I said, I've covered this side already, right? But like I say, 1.3 billion different passwords, right? We can find a lot of stuff. But I suppose you've ended up making data about data at this point, right? You know, and people talk to me about metadata, but I don't think we can get any better than my metadata right now. So if you like it, put some metadata on it, right? The tool has been used in some red teaming engagements. And basically, I can tell you, not details, but I can tell you 4 searches in a company had been compromised in red teaming. And basically what happened was, they searched the company, found out, so you can do like domain, what the corporate domain is, and then see where those email addresses have been, you know, are they in Ashley Madison? Are they in Adult Friend Finder? Are they in LinkedIn? Are they here? Are they there? What are the passwords? We've got the elastic table so we can decloak any of the SHA-1s and MD5s that are in LinkedIn and MySpace and so on and so forth. So this red teamer searched their client and found a bunch of passwords like SHA-1s, and none of them worked. But one of the SHA-1 was quite an interesting password. So they searched for the interesting password, and this user had reused their work password in their private email address. They researched the private email address, and a bunch of new hashes came in. And well, of course, if they've reused their password once, they've reused their password again. And right enough, they were able to decloak a functioning password. And within 4 searches, I think total, they were on the corporate network with credentials from data, from a total passive source that you wouldn't have detected, right? Pretty cool, right? Same goes for pen tests as well, right? So we can able to give clients word lists of like, hey, these are the passwords for your company that are likely to be, block them at host because this is a bad day in the office. I've learned a lot from kind of building this tool. I think the most important lesson that I've learned straight away is that Vim users are basically the vegans of the internet. Okay. And that some users will use their point of sale device's password as their actual to fucking God password on web service. Like, you fucking what? It's all fun and games until you have to hard reset your credit card processing facilities in all of your businesses. What's interesting about this particular story is it was the number 2 in the company that did it, so it's quite hard to fire the number 2, right? But you know, I suppose it could be a lot worse, right? I mean, who would use their VPN? Oh, for fuck's sake. Yeah, okay, thank you. So your password hint is VPN password. These are all statically assigned hashes at the side, so we can search and find out what your password is, find the reuse of it, and so on and so forth. Now, you know, it's only the VPN. I mean, surely people know how to separate that, oh, fuck, your bank password too. Ah, oh, fuck. This one's really worrying because I've taken out the hits count on this. But this is in the 500 mark. So there is 500 people walking amongst this planet that think that their password hint for Adobe should be bank password. Or as we like to say, another flawless victory. I've also learned that no matter how elite you think you are, how awesome you try and be, that everybody at some point will be a victim of a third-party data breach. Oh shit, me too? Right. It's painful, right? Needless to say, you can't search my hash up on the system. I don't know, it wasn't cracked, I don't know what it is. You have to remember about all of this that I'm talking to you about. This is completely and utterly passive. I'm not speaking to a web service. I'm not talking to email format or any of these other services at all. This is all happening on our box, on our network. We pull down a dumped SQL and convert it to JSON. How on earth would you know what I'm doing until I come for you? There's no two ways about it. So it's passive, mostly passive. I did a talk for a bunch of C-levels in London at the Institute of Directors. And I don't know, I think as a Scot, you inspire other people to swear. I don't know if there's something in our DNA that emits something to you that says, oh, I'm with a Scot, fucking great. So I was at this, I showed them what we could do and what we were up to, and everyone else had nice feedback. Oh, this is very good. I'll give them a 5.6. And all my feedback, C-level, was, this is scary shit, fucking hell, oh my god, fuck's sake, da-da-da-da-da. Now, I didn't find this particularly, I did find it particularly amusing, but I'd been used to it because the year before, I had them saying motherfucker for the whole entire day, right? Just dropped in ordinary conversation. These are people that don't normally swear. Now, I hear Chris had a wee shout out for me earlier on, so this is my time to replace, to be reciprocal to my good friend Chris Roberts. So when I first started this, I developed the Chris Roberts metric. Now put your hands up, apart from Chris, if you know who Chris Roberts is. You should do, because you saw his talk earlier on today. Chris, if there was an award for how much shit you could get into for 140 characters, I think they'd name the award the Chris Roberts Award. It's not so much that I think they'd name it after him, right? So the Chris Roberts metric in data dumps is once we find a data dump, we look for information on Boeing. Sorry, Boeing, right? It's all a bit of fun, but I wanted to immortalize my friend's work. So this is the Chris Roberts metric. I implore you to carry this metric on as well. If you find a new data dump, please just search for Boeing. And let me know, did you get like a Chris Roberts 25, a Chris Roberts 5000, whatever, right? So the Chris Roberts metric when we started was 153. And this was Ashley Madison, Adult Friend Finder, and LowSec. And there was 153 accounts in those that had used their Boeing email account to sign up for Ashley Madison. Okay. Put your hands up if you know what Ashley Madison is. How do you know what Ashley Madison were? So the Chris Roberts metric, now we're just under 45,000. So in 61 data dumps, there are about 45,000 Boeing email addresses in there with personal identifiable information. Boeing is not alone. We pick on it because Chris is our friend, but we could have done this to Airbus, we could have done this to BBC, we could have done this to HP, right? We could have taken the piss out of these guys because all corporations have a problem. And as far as we can see from my point of view, it seems to be around 25 to 30% of global employees will end up in a third-party data breach, or already have. I saw a headline about, 1 in 3 CEOs' emails have been exposed in a leak. I'm like, fucking hell, shut up, it's 3 out of 3. You just don't know yet, that's the problem. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to show you some of the Boeing stuff, right? So, who knows what VK is? That's a Russian dating website, so I'm really wondering why Boeing employees are signing up for Russian dating websites. Here's some plain text passwords. Oh, fuck you. You're supposed to put planes in the air with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 as your password. Salute. Who are you catching a plane in the next couple of days? You can thank me for that later. Assholes, right? Sorry. Honorable mention to the Boeing employee who also signed up to Ashley Madison 13 times with his Boeing email account. There we go. I have run through my slides particularly quickly, so it does say conclusion, but I've still got some more bits to go, so don't worry. Let's cover the elephant in the room. What the fuck did you do, Finux? You just built a poor man's X key score. I'm sure that's kind of not what you're thinking, but you are now. Yes, I built a search engine that has enabled you to be able to find users that have weak passwords available on the internet. The problem is that I didn't make the data, and I know that sounds like a cop-out, and I'm not trying to cop out in any shape or form here, but you could delete my JSON files, and you know what? How much more safer would you actually be? There's nothing, this data is out there. There is no way for you to put it, there's no way to put the paste back into the toothpaste, right? It's out there, it's done, it's leaked. And it's in the billions. I think Troy Hunt had said last year that it's something around 1.5 to 3 billion accounts were leaked in 2016. And from my perspective and what we're able to see, this doesn't seem abnormal at all. And what I would say about this particular issue is this is about what we know. Because data breaches are worth money, and data breaches get traded. You know, LinkedIn was popped in way before it was leaked. And there's a whole host of databases that made it out onto the internet last year that had at least been compromised for at least 2 years before we knew it. So we have no idea really what the scale of the third-party data breach that your data, that your friends and family, that your colleagues, the people that you look after, their data is out there. And we all jump up and down about Equifax. And yeah, Equifax is a real big fucking problem. But there's a whole host of shit that's even worse. I haven't talked about Freedom Hosting in this time, but if people want to talk to me about, if you know what Freedom Hosting 2 was, we also ran them through Jekyll, and that was a really interesting story. But the problem is the data's out there. So if you're going to penalize people that are trying to find easy ways for security practitioners to be able to find what they need to protect and how quickly they need to protect it, shutting them down becomes a problem because bad guys are doing this. They're not so advanced just yet. Who heard of the dump, the mother of all dumps? Have you guys heard of this yet? So, remember that Yahoo got popped, and they were like, no, it's 500 million, 1.5 billion. So what happened on the black market is that people started trading the Yahoo dump. I had a client come to me and say, hey, we've got the Yahoo dump, but we're not sure it's the Yahoo dump. And I'm like, it's probably not the Yahoo dump then. And we had a look at it, and right enough, it wasn't the Yahoo dump. But it was interesting. It wasn't anything that I'd seen before. And it was about 500 million accounts with their plain text passwords all the way down. With the tool that I built, we were able to detect exactly actually where this list came from. And what it was a combination of about 7 or 8 different leaks. And what they'd done is everything that they could crack, they put it into a great big Word file, and then they grepped it for what they were looking for. And this is a really rudimentary index with search capabilities. That was just last year. So if you don't think bad guys are building search engine-like things to find targets and attack targets, I'm afraid I would have to disagree with you. I also used to think that we totally sucked at teaching web developers about input validation and sanitization, right? And what I can tell you is, I fucking know now that we suck at working with database administrators. If you want to have a look at how bad the problem is, so what happens is we put all of this work. Nobody owns the data in that process, right? So web developers pass it off to the DBA, and the DBA says, well, the web developers had it, and they just throw it in the database. And if you don't believe that there's no sanitization going on, you just need to check any SQL dump down the email column, and what you'll see is a lot of stuff that's not even regex compliant, never mind anything else. And it seems to me that, yes, we could have done it with the web developer, but we sure as hell could have got the DBA to do something as well, because that's their data. They're the administrator of that data. And there's data in there that's not validatable, that is unsafe and hasn't been sanitized. And literally any dump that you'll find, most of them will have this characteristic, that there's no input validation going on. What I can also tell you is I did some analytics on Freedom Hosting. Put your hands up again if you know what Freedom Hosting is. Okay, so there's 3 of you that put your hands up, so I'll explain it quickly. Freedom Hosting was basically a free tier .onion web server place, right, where you could go and put on your dark market, blah, 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 blah. And they would give you 256 megs of server space and 500 megs traffic, and the whole idea was kind of get you hooked. You know, get your .onion, and then it's not enough services, we're going to buy a tier model. And they got fucking owned like you wouldn't believe. So Freedom Hosting got owned. About 10,000 .onion websites were compromised as a result of this. And their keys as well, the private keys for the Onion services. So it turned out to be about 20% of the dark web's websites were compromised through Freedom Hosting. Which is why a lot of pedophiles have been arrested over the past 12 months, because there was a lot of shit up there anyway. But the reason I talk about this is what's really worrying is when I analyzed the two in the Freedom Hosting dump, what Freedom Hosting did was have a big database of databases. So if you were a client of Freedom Hosting, they would just throw you into their database. And when that leak came out, it was like 10,400 different databases inside the one database. It's a bit like that, you know, yo dog, I heard you liked leaks, so we put a leak inside a leak with a leak. It really was that, right? But what was really interesting from my point of view is it was almost impossible to tell the quality standard between those working at Tumblr or LinkedIn or those working on dark markets or pedophile websites, right? You couldn't tell that the quality, I'm not saying that the quality on the dark web was good, I'm saying that the quality was shit across the board. And I think that that's a really big problem. Especially since now, it's clear that we're probably looking at 6 or 7 billion different pieces of personal identifiable information knocking about that these people are making very simple mistakes. So I've got some time for some quick stats about from where we started and how we started. So when I first built the system, 18 months ago, if that, we had 10 gigabytes of documents. And as I said earlier on, a document is a collection of information. It's not a piece of information. So when we started, we had like 10 gigs worth of data on the disk. Today, we have 728 gig. And if you miss that, that's 72 times bigger than when we first started less than 18 months ago. This is all publicly available this is all on the internet, web browser. That's how you're getting this information. And this is just what I have time to work on. And I shouldn't be a metric for anyone. When I started this, we had 127 million unique documents, with users in them, nearly 128 million. Today, that's 20 times bigger in 18 months. We're now sitting at 2.7 billion documents of personal identifiable information, which range from 2 to 3 pieces all the way up to 11 or 12. As of today, we've discovered just under 1 billion unique email addresses that have been leaked in 61 databases, which I find, we basically have 1/8 of a planet for scale, which is a little bit worrying, right? Let's have some fun. So let's look. Now, remember at the beginning that I said, fuck you guys, I don't believe for one moment that none of you in here know what Mate 1 is. There's a reason for that. So Mate 1 is a dating website for all of you people that are pretending you don't know what it is. So Michigan had 1.2 million users or accounts released in the Mate 1 leak. How many know what the population of Michigan as a state is? Is it 10 million? Oh shit, that's quite a sizable number. But I tell you what, let's be a little bit hard on this. That covers a unique email account of just over 700,000. So you can do the maths yourself, and I know it's barroom maths, but in one leak, Michigan, 7% of the state had its information released in one leak. Yes, there is some false positives, without doubt. Because, 42 people had used the Michigan Department of Treasury as their zip code, which does seem a little bit odd. But this isn't unusual either. And so how we got to finding these data is I pulled a list of zip codes for Michigan. And I said, hey, let's do a search on zip codes. And this is how I got the 1.2 million. And the original idea was, hey, why don't we pull the 1.2 million people down, get the unique email addresses, and use that as a seed list to find other people in Michigan that had lost their data. So where else did these 730,000 people lose their data? And I started that a week ago, and it's still running. So I imagine you guys are pretty fucked. Sorry. But as I say, it's likely to be some false positives in there. But, shoo-shoo, you're fucking with my narrative. So who wants to see the top 20 passwords for Mate 1 users from the state of Michigan? I'd like to hear a cheer of yes. Are you ready for the deep disappointment that you're going to carry around with you for the rest of your fucking life? Oh, you fucking assholes. Number 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You fucking what? And this goes on. Apparently someone's looking for pussy. I don't understand. What is interesting about the data here? Can anyone explain to me why London has been used 569 times by people from Michigan on Mate 1? Is there like something popular here that's London related or something? Does anyone, if you can work that out, let me know. That one's quite unusual. I think you should also maybe look at the second from the bottom, because Nothing says I want to get laid more than saying I love you, mummy. And of course, a lot of these make sense, right? Detroit, Red Wings, football, so on and so forth. I'll give you an interesting other side fact too, that after I did all the password analytics with the Freedom hosting, what do you think was the top password used by people on the dark market, in .onion space? What do you think the most popular password was? 123456. I was even more disappointed that I'm going online to buy heroin and sort of, hitman for hire and all the other bullshit that they tell you about markets. And yay, we secured it with 123456. You fucking dicks. Other side story, in the Freedom hosting dump, so you're going onto the dark net to do dark things, there was 330,000 clear net email addresses inside the Freedom hosting dump, of which of those people, 56,000 had already experienced a third-party data breach in the ClearNet world. And the cases of password reuse was astronomical. Now, I don't want to advise criminals on better password policy, but change your fucking shit up, will you? Oh my God. So yeah, that's kind of everything that I really wanted to talk. It went really quickly, I'm sorry, right? But I suppose we've got another maybe 10 minutes for questions. But if you've got any questions for me, please drop me an email. If you don't, feel free to ask them now. And thank you and enjoy the rest of your GrrCON. So the question, if you were interested, was, yo, Ashley Madison's old. Is it really going to be relevant in passwords anymore? I think is the synopsis of that. And yes, because we all know users, right? What happens with users when you send them a password reset? They just change the number at the end. And the thing when you have the capability of searching so many different databases simultaneously is you can isolate users that do exactly that, because you can see their password history. You have kind of like half of Minority Report. You have this view back historical of what your user's been up to and what they've done. So yeah, I do think there's a value because you are able to see password policies inside of organizations, but you're also able to confirm the well-known theory that users will reuse passwords, and at worst case scenario, they'll put a 1. And when I speak to incident responders about this stuff, they are really under the opinion that I just need to reset the password and it's fine. And you're like, yeah, for 3 months. And then when your user has recycled their 3 passwords that they use every 42 days, we're back into the game again. Because passwords are like trainers, right? You find a good pair and then you stick with them for a couple of years. And this is what our users are doing, right? So I do think so. Interesting side story as well. Ashley Madison was really interesting because Ashley Madison managed to fuck up the way that you do encryption. So they took bcrypt, which is supposed to be like, you can't crack it that way. Duh, dumbass. So what they did is they put a backdoor into their own encryption by mistake by having a thing called a logging key. And this logging key was a SHA of the plain text password. To this day, we don't understand why they did it, because they didn't use it. But this fuck up meant that 11 million Ashley Madison users' passwords were very easy to decloak. And out of that, there's something like 600,000 that had actually used their email address as their password. And if you, users are fucking inventive motherfuckers. So they literally put their password in their email address into the username, copy it, and put it into the password. Because guess what? Alphanumeric, special characters, ta-da! So I can guarantee you, just on the off shot that you want to do some brute forcing against someone in a pen test, do me a favor and just try the part. It's not going to do any more work for you, but just try the email address and email address. And if it works, just let me know, because I love that shit. That's fucking awesome. So I learned that from Ashley Madison too. So yeah, you do get to learn a lot from it. I hope that answered the question. Is there any more questions? You might have to stand up. No? Well, in that case, do enjoy the rest of GrrCON, and thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.